Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the next and the third virtual meeting of the Greenwich Industrial History Society. During lockdown, we've been doing virtual meetings. So Mary Mills spoke a month ago. I spoke 2 months ago. And today we've got Stewart Ash, who is going to be talking on the Eastern Telegraph Company's first cable system, the Red Sea line to India. He was going to do it on the 150th anniversary, which was in March or April, May. I remember writing about it for Capacity magazine, the 150th anniversary of the first connection between Britain and India. So Stewart is a cable consultant. He is the author of this. I hope you can see it. Cable King, The Life of John Pender, who ran the Southeast London-based cable industry, subsea cable industry, where, as I said in my own talk 2 months ago, where something like almost all of the subsea cables in the world between 1850 and 1950 were made in Greenwich and Charlton and Woolwich and North Woolwich, an extraordinary legacy. Now, Stewart is going to comment on the fact that it's 150 years this year since the UK was first connected directly to India via Gibraltar, Malta, Alexandria, Aden, and the Indian Ocean. And the cable was made in Greenwich. And the Aden-Mumbai stretch was laid by the Great Eastern, the Brunel paddle steamer that was built, of course, as all Greenwich Industrial History Society people know, was built on the Isle of Dogs, and you can still see the launch ramp there on the foreshore. Stewart Ash is somebody who worked in Southeast London, works still in Southeast London, was at what was STC and then Alcatel Submarine Networks, is still there. A bit of it is still there. And he's now a full-time cable consultant working with subsea cable operators around the world. I'm going to stop waffling and hand over to Stewart. So Stewart, go on. And if you carry on speaking and can share your screen and talk. Hello, okay. Stewart.
Thanks very much. I'll try and share my screen first. Mikey, where do I go here? There we go. Right. Can everybody see that?
Thank you, Stewart. Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Right, if everybody can hear me, I'll begin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be asked to talk to you tonight about the Red Sea line to India. As Alan said, 150 years ago, the first successful all-British telegraph cable to India went into commercial service. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I would like to tell you something about how this came to pass, how it led to the formation of the Eastern Telegraph Company that would become the largest telecommunications company in the world, and the man who made it all happen. To set the scene, we must go back to perhaps the most famous story of the telegraph era, the Atlantic Telegraph Project. And as a reminder, I will quickly show you some of the key milestones that relate to this world-changing event. After 12 long years, the challenges were finally overcome and 2 Atlantic cables went into service. In recognition of this great achievement, Queen Victoria awarded decorations to 6 leading members of the project. In the 1867 New Year's Honours List, the following men were recognised. Lamson was Deputy Chairman of the Atlantic Telegraph Company and was also on the board of the Anglo-American Telegraph Company. Gooch was Chairman of the Great Eastern Steamship Company and a Director of the Telegraph Construction and Maintenance Company, known as Telcon. Anderson was the Captain of the SS Great Eastern. Thompson was the
Stewart, can I just interrupt a minute? You've got a bit of noise. Your mic is rubbing against something or something like that.
Oh, okay, probably my beard. Okay, where was I? Thomson was the chief scientist of the Atlantic Telegraph Company. Glass was chairman of the Anglo-American Telegraph Company and managing director of Telcon. Canning was the chief engineer of Telcon. Field had been the driving force behind the project from the beginning, and although his contribution was recognised in the announcement, as an American citizen, he was ineligible for a British decoration. A knighthood was also offered to the Honourable James Stewart Wortley, who was the chairman of the Atlantic Telegraph Company, but this was declined. The man who had done more than any other and risked more financially to make the Atlantic Telegraph a success was not recognised in any way. That man was John Pender. But who was he? John Pender, seen here in an 1864 portrait by George Frederick Watts, was a Scotsman born in Bon Hill in 1816, who rose from relative obscurity to become the manager of a large textile works near Glasgow. John's first wife, Marion Nee Cairns, died in 1841, shortly after giving birth to his son James. And in 1844, he moved to Manchester to set up his own business, John Pender & Co. Commission Agents. In 1851, he married Emma Denison. This 1856 portrait by Philip Westcott was a 40th birthday present from John to her. By then, they had 3 children of their own, and Emma was pregnant with their last child, Marion. It was Emma who, in 1852, encouraged John to make his first investment in the electric telegraph. By 1867, John was a very wealthy man. He had large offices in central Manchester at 10 to 12 Mount Street. And in addition, he leased 3 large warehouses. The main family home was in the Crumpsall House estate to the northwest of Manchester. From 1863, they had a London residence at 18 Arlington Street, a large Gothic-style building behind a gatehouse. Pender also owned a Scottish estate, Menard Castle on Loch Fyne, where he kept a steam yacht called Sunbeam. In 1866, he had used her to follow the Great Eastern from Sheerness to Valentia at the start of her historic voyage. As you can see, Pender was clearly a very successful cotton merchant, but why do I suggest that his contribution to the Atlantic Telegraph was so significant? When John Watkins Brett, Charles Tilston Bright, and Cyrus Westfield came to Manchester to raise capital for this company, John Pender had been one of the first to invest £1,000. He also encouraged other Manchester men to invest, helping significantly to raise the required £350,000. For this, he was invited to join the board of directors, but having played no direct part in the project, after the 1858 failure, he resigned his directorship to concentrate on his textile business and the coming cotton famine. Pender was the chairman of this important company that provided the vital link between London and the west coast of Ireland, a position he held until it was nationalised. It became part of the General Post Office in 1870. After John Watkins Brett's death in 1863, Field turned to Pender to take the lead with the British investors, and during a walk from Arlington Street to the Houses of Parliament, he invited Pender to rejoin the board, a position he accepted and held until its merger with the Anglo-American in 1870. Pender took on the difficult task of merging the Gutta Perch Company and Glass Elliott & Co. To convince the directors of both companies, he put up a personal guarantee of £250,000. He became Telcon's first chairman until he stood down and was replaced by Daniel Gooch in 1868. It was Pender, along with Thomas Brassey, who assisted Gooch with the purchase of the Great Eastern, and he remained a director of this company until till the ship was decommissioned in 1878. It was also Pender who personally approached Cunard and secured the services of James Anderson as master of the Great Eastern. When after the 1865 failure, the Atlantic Telegraph Company was unable to raise new capital, it was then Pender and Gooch who raised the £650,000 to launch this company and complete the project. Both invested £10,000 and became directors. The first chairman, Richard Atwood Glass, retired due to ill health in March 1867, and on the death of his successor, Charles Edward Stewart, in 1868, Pender replaced him as chairman. He would later become chairman of the two merged companies, a position he held until his death. Despite this pivotal role in the ultimate success of the Atlantic Telegraph, he received no royal recognition. This lack of appreciation must have been a bitter pill for Pender to swallow, but if anything, it drove him on to bigger and better things. The expansion of the British Empire had led to the British government desiring faster communication between India and London, and two major events led to more detailed plans being developed. One scheme was to lay a terrestrial cable through Mesopotamia to the head of the Persian Gulf, but it failed when the Ottoman Empire refused to grant a license to cross its land. From 1858, the British government began to encourage other projects by offering attractive grants and subsidies, which led to the formation of this company founded by private investment. The cable design proved totally inadequate for the conditions, too little slack was installed, and no messages were ever sent over it. Investors lost all their money, and the outcry alongside the failure of the 1858 Atlantic Telegraph led to the Board of Trade Committee of Inquiry, chaired by Captain Douglas Galton. Once the Committee of Inquiry report had been issued in April 1861, the British government began to look at communication to India again. This department planned to run a cable along the Makran coast from Fao via Bushire and Gwadar, then on to Karachi, which at that time was still part of India. Once again, the Ottoman Empire scuppered the plans, and the cable route from Gwadar was diverted to Masandam at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Under contract to the government of India, the core was insulated by the Gutta Percha Company and armoured by W.T. Henley's telegraph works at its North Woolwich factory. It was installed under the direction of the consultant engineer Sir Charles Tilston Bright. Due to fears of sabotage, the cable at Masandam was landed on a small rocky island in the Elphinstone inlet of the peninsula, which became known as Telegraph Island. This telegraph station was abandoned in 1868 when the cable was diverted. Carl Wilhelm Siemens came to England in 1843, and in 1865 he founded a factory on the River Thames at Woolwich to make submarine cables. In 1869 he would be joined by his younger brother Karl Heinrich. They too saw the commercial benefits of building a system to India and were instrumental in setting up this company. Having made such a large financial risk, it was a relief when they were able to provide the most competitive tender for the supply of the system. Because Telcon now had a virtual monopoly over gutta percha insulation, Siemens could not consider a system with long submarine cables, so they adopted a different approach. The work progressed at an impressive rate, but unfortunately for Siemens, an earthquake broke their Black Sea cable, and it took over a year to repair it, before the complete system could be finally commissioned. By then, Pender's submarine system had been in operation for over 6 months, and it was to prove the more reliable. It is not clear exactly when John Pender first considered building a cable to India. As early as December 1866, Telkom made a proposal to the Secretary of State of India, Robert Arthur Talbot Gascoigne Cecil, then Viscount Cranborne. He would later become the third Marquis of Salisbury and the Prime Minister. His London residence was next door to one to Pender in Arlington Street. However, due to the government's recently adopted policy of non-interference, Telkom's offer was rejected. In February 1868, on medical advice, Lord Derby stood down as Prime Minister and was replaced by the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Benjamin Disraeli. The Telegraph Act was one of the first pieces of legislation that he tabled. It enabled the Post Office to buy out all the private terrestrial telegraph companies and run them itself. This was the trigger for Pender to change course. While the bill was still at the committee stage, Pender resigned as chairman of the British and Irish Magnetic Telegraph Company and sold all his shares before they could be compulsorily purchased. Around the same time, he stood down as chairman of Telkom in favour of Daniel Gooch, but retained his stock holding in the company. Pender then set about his plans to build a cable to India, and he started with founding this company that was initially chaired by Lord William Hay. This was the first step on the road to what would become the global cable network operated by the Eastern and Associated Telegraph Companies. Pender's approach to this massive project was to establish limited companies for each section of the route in order to mitigate financial exposure. Anglo-Mediterranean was launched on the 18th of May 1868. It took control of a new, mainly terrestrial cable from Suez in Piedmont on the French border down the length of Italy with a small submarine cable across the Messina Straits to Modica in Sicily. The company then acquired the existing Brett Brothers cable installed by R.S. Newell and Company in 1857. That same year, Glass Elliott and Co. laid this cable for the British government, and Anglo-Mediterranean acquired this as well. Telkom was awarded a contract to lay this new cable, and the 905 nautical mile link was installed by their ships Chiltern and Scandaria. Finally, they took over the monopoly concession once held by the defunct Red Sea and Telegraph to India Company. By the end of 1868, Anglo-Mediterranean had control of the telegraph from Suez to the French border. This was an excellent time to be in control of the telegraph traffic between Egypt and Paris, as the Suez Canal was in its final phase of construction. Because of this access, in November 1875, Pender was instrumental in the British government being able to purchase 49% of the Canal Company shares. But that's a story for another time. As we've seen, John Pender wasn't the only one thinking of a cable to India. In August 1867, a consortium was formed headed by Charles Edward Stewart, at that time chairman of the Atlantic Telegraph Company, and they issued a prospectus for this company. Their plan was to lay a cable from Suez to Bombay via Aden and the Kuria-Muria Islands, now part of the Governorate of Dhofar. The company secured landing rights in Egypt and engaged Charles Stilton Bright and Josiah Latimer Clark as consultant engineers, but found it difficult to attract investors and raise the necessary capital. So when Charles Stewart died suddenly in the Atlantic Telegraph Company offices at 22 Old Broad Street on the 19th of February 1868, aged just 51, the Anglo-Indian project collapsed, and the company had to be wound up. This left the field free for Pender. The prospectus for Pender's second company was issued on the 29th of January 1869. By comparison, the British Indian had no trouble attracting investors, as once again John Pender put up a substantial sum in the form of a personal guarantee. This time Pender was the chairman, and this was the first of many submarine operating companies of which he became the founding chairman. Lord William Hay was the vice chairman, and Sir James Anderson was appointed managing director. The supply contract was worth £1 million, and Telcon took £460,000 of its fee in British Indian fully paid up shares. The cable was made at Telcon's two factories at Enderby and Morden Walls. As with the Atlantic cables, the Great Eastern was loaded at Sheerness from hulks towed downriver from the factories. The system was laid from east to west, and Telcon utilised 5 ships in the operation. On February the 7th, 1870, Chiltern laid the Bombay shore end, and on the 14th of February, Great Eastern, then with her hull and superstructure painted white to keep the ship's internal temperature down, and under the command of Captain Robert Halpin, commenced the main lay. The lay proceeded without incident, and on the 27th of February, Great Eastern rendezvoused with Chiltern at Aden. Chiltern spliced on the heavy inshore cable, which he paid out and buoyed off. The shore end was finally landed from a barge on the 1st of March. This illustration comes from a book called The Eastern Telegraph to India, written by Joseph Charles Parkinson, a correspondent with the Daily News. He was present throughout the operation, transferring from ship to ship as the lay progressed. The other shore end in Aden for the link to Suez was again laid by a barge, and on the 6th of March, Chiltern recovered the buoy and laid a further 5 nautical miles of cable out into a water depth of 100 fathoms. That same day, the end was transferred to the Great Eastern, and she commenced the lay towards Suez. After laying a further 278 nautical miles of cable, her role in the project was complete, and the laying operation was transferred to the Hibernia under the command of Captain Welsh. On the 9th of March, Captain Halpin and the cable laying team transferred to the Hibernia. Great Eastern's buoy was recovered, the new cable spliced on, and payout commenced that day. Hibernia laid a further 515 nautical miles of cable before, on the 12th of March, buoying the end off in 511 fathoms of water. Separately, on the 14th of March, the Suez shore end was laid from a barge, and the following day the Hawk, under the command of Captain Bristow, extended the shore end into deeper water, where the cable end was transferred to the William Corey. Unlike the Great Eastern and Hibernia, both ships had come through this newly opened Suez Canal, where the William Corey had run aground, and it was several days before she could be floated off. So this part of the project was running behind the planned schedule. William Corey spliced on her cable and commenced payout. On the morning of the 16th of March, Hibernia rendezvoused with William Corey. Captain Halpin came on board, and the cable was cut and buoyed off, with only 100 nautical miles of the main lay cable deployed. After some discussion, it was agreed that Hawk would return to Suez, while Hibernia and the William Corey would return to Chiltern, standing guard on the buoy of the Bombay end of the cable. On the 17th of March, the 3 ships met, but due to stormy weather, the cable laying team could not transfer to the William Corey until that evening. The following day, William Corey recovered the Bombay end, but a storm blew up and the cable parted under tension. It wasn't until the 21st of March that the cable could be recovered, and William Corey commenced laying her cable towards Suez. She paid out with Chiltern sailing to starboard and Hibernia to port, until Hibernia was sent ahead to ensure that the buoy was still on the Suez end. The William Corey completed her lay on the morning of the 22nd of March 1870, and the final splice was slipped at 16:20 local that day. Pender's original plan was for his system to cross France and then continue over the English Channel to London. However, he was frustrated by the French government when he could not negotiate operating rights over their terrestrial cable. So, not to be beaten, Pender registered his third company. The original landing site in the UK was meant to be Falmouth, but it was moved to Porthcurno due to concerns over damage to the cable that could be caused by ships' anchors around this busy port. In addition, through the successful lobbying of the Portuguese government, the route was modified to include a landing in Lisbon. Edinburgh, Hawke, and the Scandaria laid the 1150 nautical miles of cable to Gibraltar. Then Hibernia on her return passage from the Red Sea, and the Investigator laid the 366 nautical mile cable from Gibraltar to Carcavelos, north of Lisbon. Although not part of the direct route to India, Pender founded his fourth company and built a cable between Marseille, Bonnet in Algeria, and Malta. It was installed at the request of the French government, as by doing so, Pender thought it would assist him in obtaining the landline concession. However, the concession was awarded to Philip Arthur Stanhope, who had only acquired it to sell it to the highest bidder. Pender successfully blocked Stanhope's attempts to sell to anyone else, and he finally purchased it from Stanhope in October 1876 at the cost of £100,000. On completing the link between Gibraltar and Carcavelos, the Hibernia began laying the last 765 nautical miles section to England, while the Investigator went ahead to Porthcurno, where she landed the shore end on the 6th of June 1870, and 2 days later Hibernia completed the final splice. John Pender was in the cable hut on the beach at Porthcurno to witness the first message sent over his system to Bombay. Both scenes were captured by the artist Robert Dudley, who presented these paintings to Pender shortly afterwards. They remained among his most treasured possessions until his death. On the 22nd of June 1870, these cables commenced commercial telegraphic communication between London and Bombay. Messages that might have previously taken weeks or months to deliver to India could be sent over 6,000 nautical miles of submarine cable, and even though they required 12 separate transmit and receive operations, could be achieved in just 10 minutes. To celebrate this outstanding achievement, a soiree was held at John Pender's London home on the 23rd of June. The guest of honour was Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and Cromwell Varley demonstrated modern telegraph techniques. Guests were invited to send messages to Bombay, Calcutta, and New York, receiving replies within 15 minutes. To commemorate the occasion, a 70-page leather-bound souvenir booklet was produced. In 1872, John Pender persuaded his shareholders to merge the four companies that we have discussed this evening to form the Eastern Telegraph Company, with a total share capital of £3.8 million. Over the next 20 years, working closely with Daniel Gooch, Pender used a similar business model to build his global network, and in most cases, the supply contract was awarded to Telcon. By the time John Pender left Manchester in 1873 and made Arlington Street his main residence, his cables spanned half the globe, from the UK to New Zealand. And on his death in 1896, his Eastern and Associated Telegraph Companies controlled a telegraph network that connected every country where the British Empire had political and/or commercial interests. These systems were extremely lucrative, but more importantly, they controlled business, government, and military communications. This gave Pender incredible power and influence, which inevitably attracted envy and competition. As soon as these services were in place, he had to fight to protect his shareholders' investment and retain the company's leading stroke monopoly positions. However, how he achieved this is perhaps a story for another day. In order to fund the expansion of his cable network, in 1875, John Pender sold Menard Castle and the Sunbeam, and the following year he took a 21-year lease on Footscray Place, owned by the Van Sittart family. John and Emma's eldest son, Henry, contracted typhoid while travelling in Italy with his father. He died at Footscray Place on the 13th of January, 1881. Aged just 28, he was the first Pender to be buried in the graveyard of All Saints Church. Henry had been an accomplished organist, and the Penders donated an organ to the church in his memory. It is still there today. He was buried in a simple grave, but it was his mother's wish that when she died, she would be buried alongside her son. And so John Pender had a family vault constructed with a 3-metre Celtic cross on top, standing on a granite frustum. Built in 1754, Footscray Place was one of only 4 Palladian mansions to be found in the United Kingdom, but regrettably it was destroyed by fire under suspicious circumstances in 1949. It took a long time for the British establishment to recognise John Pender, partly due to him being a self-made man, but mainly because he had fallen out with William Gladstone over Home Rule for Ireland and Gladstone's ambition to nationalise his companies. Finally, in the 1888 New Year's Honours List, John Pender was recognised when he received a knighthood. This honour had been sponsored by Lord Salisbury, and on this occasion it appears that Gladstone was unable or unwilling to block it. The Eastern Telegraph Company organised a banquet in his honour, which took place at the Metropole Hotel in London on the 23rd of April, when 220 guests sat down to dinner. The organising committee arranged for a portrait of John Pender to be painted and presented to Emma, with a copy for her to present to the company. The commission was awarded to Hubert von Herkomer, and the original was presented to Sir John at the banquet, when, in his acceptance speech, he guaranteed that Emma would be very happy with it. After the banquet, the portrait was put on display in the spring exhibition of the Royal Society of Arts. Emma saw it for the first time when the copy was delivered to Arlington Street. She was not impressed and wrote to Herkomer expressing her disappointment. Recognising the Pender's influence in the arts and the risk to his reputation, Herkomer agreed to paint a replacement for no additional fee. It was delivered to Emma at Footscray Place in January 1890, and she was much happier with this second version. When it was returned from the exhibition, the original painting was consigned to the cellar at Arlington Street. The second portrait hung there until John Pender's death, after which it was donated to the Eastern Telegraph Company and hung in the company's boardroom throughout the 20th century. It is now in the Telegraph Museum at Porthcurno. The original portrait was donated to Wick in 1899 and now hangs in their town hall. What became of the copy is unknown. Apart from his knighthood, John Pender received recognition from all over the world of his massive contribution to international trade in general and submarine telegraphy in particular. In 1892, once again at the behest of Lord Salisbury, his KCMG was raised to GCMG. But the barony promised to him by the Liberal Unionist Party for retaining his seat as MP for Wick in the 1895 general election never materialised. In December 1895, John Pender suffered a severe stroke, and his name was absent from the 1896 New Year's Honours List. Why this should have happened is unclear, but 2 possible theories exist. The first is that Joseph Chamberlain and the Duke of Devonshire did not have the influence in Salisbury's government to deliver what they had promised, and that Pender's stroke was brought on by the knowledge that his hopes of a hereditary peerage had been dashed. The second is that Lord Salisbury had the warrant ready for Queen Victoria to sign, but withdrew it after Pender's stroke, as the prognosis was that he would not survive. Given Salisbury's previous sponsorship of Pender, this second story seems to be the most likely, and it is the one that has been passed down through the Denison Pender family. After his stroke, Against all expectations, John Pender rallied. However, he was never able to work again, and in May 1896, his son James, then MP for Northampton, stood up in the House of Commons and announced that his father would never take his seat again. In July, he suffered another massive stroke and died at Footscray Place with all his family around him. His funeral took place at All Saints Church on the 17th of July. The service was conducted by the local vicar Charles Birch and John's old friend George Bradley, the Dean of Westminster. Over 250 mourners packed the tiny church and surrounding graveyard, and John Pender was laid to rest in the family vault, alongside Emma, who had died in 1890, and Henry. Shortly after John's death, the graveyard was expanded and the trees around the tomb were felled. When Pender's eldest daughter Anne died in 1902, she was buried in the family vault and her name added to the frustrum. The Celtic cross was blown down and broken in the Great Storm of 1987, but thanks to Cable and Wireless, it was repaired in 1993 and is still there today. It is the only lasting memorial to the life of John Pender accessible to the general public. After John Pender's death, a memorial committee was formed with the lofty ambition of creating a national monument to the great man. £6,277 was raised and £5,000 was used to set up a trust to endow a new electrical engineering laboratory to University College London. This was to be called the Pender Laboratory, and the chair of the electrical engineering department was also to be renamed the Pender Chair. The first person to be appointed to the Pender Chair was Sir John Ambrose Fleming in 1897. The Pender Laboratory was officially opened in 1902 by Pender's youngest son, John Denison Pender. The remainder of the fund was used to commission a marble bust. The sculptor chosen was Edward Onslow Ford, and the work was completed in 1897. The bust was first exhibited in the Corporation of Manchester Art Gallery the following year, before being put on permanent display at UCL when the Pender Laboratory was officially opened. It remains there to this day. A second bust was made and offered to Glasgow University, but it was declined on the basis that John Pender had no association with the university. They did, however, accept the scholarship funding that was offered with it, and I believe the John Pender Scholarship is still awarded to this day. The second bust is in the possession of the Denison Pender family and is not on public display. In 1922, as part of the Golden Jubilee celebrations, the Eastern Telegraph Group's in-house magazine Zodiac reflected the story of John Pender's inexhaustible tenacity and courage, and his enduring faith in the face of recurring adversity is an inspiration to all, and it is typical of the finest British instincts. There is little doubt that it was these characteristics, combined with his understanding of the importance of telecommunication to trade and diplomacy, that enabled him to build his global submarine cable network. However, today few people have even heard of him or are aware of the debt the world owes him for the immense legacy that he left us. The company that John Pender founded in 1864 brought employment and prosperity to the Greenwich Peninsula, and perhaps his legacy has been captured on the riverfront at Enderby Wharf. As part of the planning permission for the Enderby Wharf regeneration, the developers were required to refurbish the house and to create an art installation that reflects the unique history of the site. This installation is called Ley Lines and stands on the river path next to Enderby House. It comprises 3 concrete sculptures inspired by the cable designs of each of the eras of submarine cable transmission. The first is based on the cable design that was used for the initial attempts to lay an Atlantic cable, and was the first to be manufactured at Enderby Wharf. The second sculpture depicts the cable design that was the most successful of the telephone era. It was made in Greenwich from 1970 to 1976. The last sculpture represents the current Alcatel submarine networks cable designed for fibre optic repeater systems. Although ASN's cable is made in Calais, the repeaters, power feed and transmission equipment are still made in Greenwich, and all marine installation planning is carried out there. On the wall behind, there are photos of enlarged cross-sections of each of the actual cables, and the installation also includes a QR tag which takes you to web pages where you can find information about the cable design and the history of its manufacture at Enderby Wharf. These web pages tell the story of what John Pender and Daniel Gooch achieved in building a global network of submarine cables, and how their creation ultimately led to the telecommunication environment that we all enjoy today. Submarine cables are the arteries of the internet, which, among other things, enables applications such as Zoom that has allowed us to all participate in this evening's virtual meeting. There is much more to the life story of this remarkable man, but I hope I have given you some insight into his many achievements. If I have whetted your appetite to find out more about Sir John, then you may be interested in my biography of him that was published in April 2018. And there we go.
Thank you, Stuart. If you move off from share screen so we can see you, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Hello, Stuart.
Hello.
Good to see you again. Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. And it was really good to see so many cities that are still absolutely central to the global internet, the optical fiber cables that have been laid over the last 20 or 30 years. Places like Mumbai, Marseille, Lisbon, Fortaleza I saw in that map of on the Brazilian coast. The Red Sea is absolutely, as you know well, better than I, absolutely key to the whole network that allows people to send emails and look at websites and all that, and talk on the phone even sometimes. Virtually daily. I seem to be having long distance Zoom meetings. So if anybody has a question, we have one I can read from Roland Silcox, who says that if you see the chat at the bottom of your screen, you can type in questions or you can raise your hand and ask them by voice. And I should say before we go on, this is being recorded so that we will have it on our YouTube channel. Today is Tuesday. Hopefully by Thursday, I will put it on the YouTube channel. And you just look for Greenwich Industrial History on YouTube and you will find not only the two talks we've had so far, and can you...
we're all looking at mixed screen at the moment.
Yeah, can we lose that, please, somebody? Thank you. It'll be on YouTube by later on this week, and you can watch Stuart, and you can watch Mary Mills, and you can watch me as well, talking a bit more about Greenwich. So ask some questions. We've got a number of questions so far. So Roland Silcox says, how much did it cost to send a telegraph to India from the UK in those early days?
A lot of money.
Yeah.
I can't give you a precise figure, but there's no doubt that it was only the very rich, and that's why they were built for commerce, government and military use. It was a long time before the average person could send a telegram. Well, it was called a cable then, of course.
Yes, yeah. And how long did the cable from Mumbai through to Porthcurno last, says Roland?
The ones that were originally laid eventually wore out and were replaced, but right up to the 1950s, until telephone took over. Telegraph cables along that route existed. They were replaced and duplicated because once you have heavy traffic on a cable, if a ship's anchor goes through it, you need somewhere to send the traffic. Otherwise, the customers get very upset. It's the same today.
Yeah.
You need restoration routes. And the way they got over it, because they couldn't bury cable as they do today, they duplicated or triplicated the routes. So it was between the same points, but went on different routes, so that if it wasn't, they didn't lay them alongside one another, so that if one was broken by an anchor, then the other two would still be working.
There were some high risk points. I remember, was it about 4 or 5 years ago, that somebody dragged an anchor off the coast of Alexandria in the Mediterranean and seemed to take several cables out of service in a short time, and it's probably scarred on your memory, Stuart. I bet you had something to do with sorting it out.
Yeah, I was part of an investigation into what happened. Yeah, a ship dragged its anchor over 100 nautical miles and took out 7 cables.
Oh, 7. Oh, right, yeah. Was that deliberate or accidental? Was it?
No, I'm sure it was. I would not say it was accidental. It was negligent.
Yeah.
They didn't pick up the anchor and just steamed off dragging it.
So somebody says, it's Roland again. When was the first telephone cable laid to India, and when were the first repeaters used?
Oh, 2 separate questions. I probably can't give you a date when telephone traffic to India was completed. The first repeaters were laid by the British Post Office in the North Sea in the 1940s, 1946, 48. But the modern day repeater design was developed by STC and SCL in the UK. That's the solid repeater housing. Before that, the Americans had a flexible repeater, which could be paid out through the cable engine. And that was used for TAP 1 and TAP 2, the first 2 Atlantic telegraphs. The reason for that was it was difficult to pass the housings through the cable engine that was designed in those days. So what they did was they stopped the ship and then bypassed the housing by use of ropes. And of course, that ended up with the catenary falling off and putting a lot of slack in one place. So they had to get around that problem. And they eventually did in the 1960s. So the first cable between the UK and Canada used solid repeaters as opposed to the flexible ones. So that was in 1960.
Right.
And it carried 28 voice circuits.
Brilliant. what a lot. Yes. Yeah. You mentioned also that how quickly it was to get a message from the UK to Mumbai, just a few minutes.
To be fair, that was for a special occasion.
Okay. But were they repeats, or were they sort of somehow
No, there was no repeaters at that stage. Right. Obviously, automatic repeating processes did develop over the next 30 years. But at that stage, it was one man keying, someone else listening, and then keying it on again. So
wow.
It's 12 operations.
So it might have gone through a whole lot of different people.
Yeah. But obviously for the John Pender's soiree, it was set up so it would all happen very, very quickly.
Right. Okay. Were they cheating?
No, not cheating. The technology was working the same, but if you paid for a telegram to go, it would get in a queue and it would happen, and it would still happen in under an hour, which compared to months,
of course,
was significant.
You think of the time, and before the Suez Canal was open, you think of the time for even the early steamships, the paddle steamers, but the sailing ships to get from the UK to the west coast of India would have been weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
Another question from William McDevitt says, where can I get more information about the cables made down near Woolwich? Well, your book, of course, is that. But would you like to give a plug to your book again, The Cable King? The story
no, I would say if you want, he's talking about Woolwich. Does he mean North Woolwich or South Woolwich?
Doesn't say.
Siemens
Yeah.
is South Woolwich.
Yeah.
Henley's is North Woolwich.
Yeah.
I would recommend Bill's website.
Yes.
Probably the best archive of industry history about submarine cables that exists in the world. So I would recommend him to look at the Atlantic cable site.
Are you still on, Bill?
Yes, I am. I actually just left a note in the chat with a couple of links to Henley's and Siemens on my site.
Okay, yeah, but basically you look for atlantic-cable.com. That's atlantic-cable.com. And you will find a huge amount of information about the cable industry in East London and Southeast London. Lots of photographs. Absolutely mine of information that Bill has put together. There he is. Over the years.
Yeah, the search box is a handy feature. That's how I find things on the site. The last time I counted about 1,000 pages on the site. So wow. It's fairly well indexed, but the search is easy. So if you type in Woolwich or Siemens or Henley's into my search box on any page, you'll bring up a ton of stuff. So, but I put a couple of specific links in the chat.
And if you're wondering about Bill's accent, he's a Brit who went to Leeds University and then somehow got himself to the US and lives just outside New
My
York.
American wife imported me in 1970.
Yeah, quite. Good to see you, Bill. Any more questions? Somebody says that, they're cycling past that way every day down the Thames Path. Good, but is there any more information on the Faraday buildings?
Oh, okay. The Siemens link in the chat will take you to a photo album of the Siemens factory in 1924 with quite a few photographs. In fact, the Faraday project, the building project, is using some of those photographs for their historic displays.
And my talk 2 months ago for Greenwich Industrial History Society, which was the 13th of October, also had some pictures of Siemens and the Siemens factory as it is now. And I think also Stewart knows a little bit about some of the development plans that we talked about on our last 2 meetings as well. Do you want to summarize, Stewart, what's going on the site at the moment, or what might be going on?
I wouldn't dare do that. I think Sarah is maybe still on the call, who might want to say something, but Bill and I have worked closely with you and I on the history of the site. And as you're probably aware, you and I are very keen on making sure that their regenerations do respect and reflect the history of the development. So Sarah's online and she may be able to tell you some more.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Sarah from You and I. We've been working with Stewart for a fair few years now. We submitted a planning application for the site back in December time last year.
That's December 2019. So
2019, yes. Yep. And then one of the buildings, well, the only building that we proposed to remove got listed. So now we're reworking our designs to incorporate that building and make sure all the buildings on site are retained. So the site as you see it today, all of the buildings that you see will be retained as part of our amended planning application coming forward. And we're also hoping to bring the oldest building on site, which is the long kind of white one, if you know the site, which is quite overgrown now. That was the main factory where they produced the long telegraph cables. We're proposing to turn that back into a bit of an innovation hub. So there'll be some nice links with all the innovation that once took place on this site, and then moving forward, we hope to kind of bring that spirit back to the site. So yeah, we're hoping that we should be able to put in a revised planning application in the springtime next year.
Great. What is the main purpose? Is it mainly going to be flats or art centres, innovation hubs, or what?
It's a mixed use scheme, so it's a real melting pot of uses, but predominantly homes, industrial space. We want to make sure that we keep industrial space in Charlton. I'm from Charlton originally. I come from about 5 minutes down the road from the site, so this is a particular labour of love for me, this particular project. And I know industry is at the heart of Charlton, so we want to make sure that we retain some of the industrial space, and then also an innovation hub as well. So you and I have got our own innovation brand called PlusX. We've got a couple of buildings. If you look it up, you'll see the sort of thing that we do. So yeah, that's the general proposals for the site.
And just to be clear, you and I is the name of the development company.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's not you and me or whatever, you and I.
No, I know it's confusing.
We have a message from Ian Volans, who is I've known for many, many decades. Hello, Ian, are you still there? He says he's been looking at some archives. He says, according to the Globe of the 22nd of November 1873, it appears that the Eastern Telegraph Company were running a promotion. Now, 10 words to all stations in India west of Chittagong cost £2, 4 shillings per extra word. Sorry, cost £2 and then 4 shillings per extra word. So it's £2 for 10 words, 4 shillings, which is 25 pence per extra word. First 10 words, £2, 2 shillings to stations east of Chittagong. First 10 words were £2, 2 shillings, which is £2, 10 pence these days. And then 4 shillings per extra word. The National Archive purchasing power calculator estimates that £2, 2 shillings would be worth about £138 today. So you could send 10 words to India for the equivalent today of 138 quid. So a bit expensive. And as you said, Stuart, is for the rich.
I can put that in context, because in 1870, a skilled artisan would earn between £8 and £10 a year.
Right. So, yeah. So several years' work to send one telegram to India. Yeah. Oliver. Oh, sorry, this is probably not Oliver. This is Elizabeth, using Oliver's account. Hello, Elizabeth. Do you think the unease between Gladstone and Pender was in any way connected with the fact that Gladstone was MP for Greenwich?
He took over from Charles Tilston Bright as the Greenwich MP.
Right.
I don't think it was. What I would suggest, this sounds a bit mercenary, but you should read my book.
Yeah.
Everybody should read your book.
There's a lot about the relationship between Gladstone and Pender and Pender's wife. Pender's wife used to entertain Gladstone regularly, and then she would write to her daughter about him, and they actually worked together to know what he was thinking and when he was going to try attack Pender's companies. But the biggest difference between them was over Home Rule for Ireland. That's why he was one of the initial people to break away and form the Liberal Unionist Party.
So was Pender in support of Home Rule or against?
No. Gladstone wanted Home Rule. Pender didn't want it. That's why he became a Liberal Unionist. And of course, the Liberal Unionist became part of the Conservative Party. That's why it's called the Conservative and Unionist Party now.
And was that because of political reasons or commercial reasons, that he had roots through Ireland and he wanted it to be the same part of the UK? Do you know?
Pender was a unionist. He just believed the British Empire should be the British Empire and we shouldn't give any of it away.
Right.
And of course, you've got to remember that the Eastern Telegraph Company did not include the Atlantic cables.
No.
And all of the Atlantic cables had their main stations on the west coast of Ireland.
It was going south and east.
So there was a commercial reason, but that didn't figure largely in any of the Emma's journals or the letters, anything that I've seen. No, it was a personal clash, very much about the policy of giving away part of the British Empire, as Pender would see it.
Right.
Of course, then when he tried to follow what Disraeli had done with the terrestrial telegraph companies and suggest that the government took over Pender's empire, he wasn't very happy about that either. But he managed to fight him off.
Right. Another question from Roland, which I can answer. Was Footscray Place the Footscray near Sidcup? Yes, it was. And if you think, God, I'm going to sound like an old telephone geek, most telephone numbers in Sidcup area start, well, with the 8 now after the 020. The 30, that 30 came from Footscray. Originally, it was Footscray 1, 2, 3, 4 in that sort of area because it was 300, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, Footscray is near Sidcup.
Yeah.
You want to say, what is there anything left of it now?
No, there's nothing left of the original building. It was destroyed. It was owned by Bexley Council by then, and they were going to
well-known
turn it
conservationists. Yeah.
Well, they were going to turn it into a museum apparently, and then miraculously it caught fire. And if you go to the local archives and read the newspapers, there was an amazing amount of time between getting a call to say there was a fire there and the fire engines turning up. So I think, well, it's speculation, but I believe they let it burn down. And it was then pulled down the following year.
It's long ago enough not for us not to worry about libel. Someone says, Roland again, said he worked at STC Footscray. Is the grave site still there?
Which grave
site of Pender, I guess.
Oh, yes, yeah.
STC.
As I said in the presentation, the tomb is still there.
Yeah.
In the storm of 1987, some major trees in the on the side of the graveyard fell down, and one of them hit the cross and knocked it off its frustum, smashing it and bursting into the roof of the tomb. And it was repaired by Cable. The monies funded for the repair was given by Cable and Wireless. Right. So, I mean, the picture I took was in 2017, but it's still there. And I actually had a friend of mine who'd read the book and sent me a picture just last year saying that he'd been inspired to go and visit the tomb.
Right at the top of your presentation, Stuart, you said Emma Pender got interested and encouraged her husband to be interested in subsea cables. Why was she interested? Had she got some sort of basic interest in telegraphy?
She is an incredible character. Again, you need to read the book to understand her fully. But she came from landed gentry, and she was the eldest of 2 sisters who were the daughters of a middle son in the denizens of. They came from the Nottingham area, and there's a lot about how they lost their fortune. So she spent most of her time in Chancery trying to get her money back. And so she was she was a very intelligent woman, but she was very astute in business. And when she met John Pender, he had made a massive fortune because he was at the peak of the cotton development and Turkey red dyeing, which at that time we were selling cotton materials to India, not the other way around. That's how successful they were. And in the 40s and 50s, he made an absolute fortune, but he didn't diversify. And she was much more aware of the risks of money. And one of the first things she got him to do was to diversify his portfolio. And he got investments in lots of other things. He invested in mining all over the world, and but not in the UK. His portfolio when he died, I think that he's on his will, there's stamps from something like 80 or 90 different companies. He was a big investor in the railways and that sort of thing. But she was the one who said to him, you can't keep all your money in one place. You've basically got to diversify to make sure that you don't lose it all at once. And of course, the timing of that couldn't have been better, because with the cotton famine, there were a lot of people that went to the wall in terms of the rich merchants of Manchester.
What was the cotton famine? Was that the American Civil War? Or?
Yeah, it was brought on by the American Civil War, and speculators knowing that there was going to be a shortage storing up. They bought up a lot of cotton and held it in bonded stores in Liverpool, which is one of the reasons why Liverpool and Manchester don't get on.
You mean Liverpool sort of stockpiled on the cotton?
The merchants in Liverpool did, yeah.
Waiting for the price to go up. Yes, okay. And I suppose we ought to also note that the cotton was produced by enslaved people in the southern states of America. And the Manchester cotton workers went on strike because they refused to handle it for a number of years. And a lot of them did very badly because they didn't get any money for a long, long time. Okay, any more questions?
Yes, I've got a question.
Yes, go ahead.
It's Gareth Parry from Porthcurno.
Hello, Gareth.
And first of all, Stewart, brilliant talk. I mean, we know your book and we know the attention to detail that you've given, and that was just superb. I have a couple of things really. The first thing was that the Pender legacy. There is a Pender legacy which is still exists, and that is, you mentioned, of course, that when he died, 1896, then there was a memorial that was set up, and there was a chair created at UCL, and the first professor there was Ambrose Fleming, who many of us will know was the inventor of the valve, and actually Fleming was actually a consultant to Marconi, and actually had a great deal of impact on the transatlantic radio communication, wireless communication, although Marconi was never willing to give him credit. But anyway, what's really interesting is that legacy still exists, that over the years, year on year, the people who have taken over that chair, going from wireless communication through to coaxial waveguide, and in more recent years, fiber optic communication. So the Pender chair is still really an important part of the story of Pender. And I think that's really, really important. And the other thing is it's if you allow me, it's a plug for the fact that 150 years, then Stewart and I have talked about this over the years, over the last few years, is that we couldn't celebrate the arrival of the first cable in Porthcurno last year, but we will be this year. And in April 23rd, I think is the date, then we will have a reenactment of the landing of the cable at Porthcurno. So if those of you who are listening would like to hear more about it, then we'd be delighted to tell you more about it. It's all detailed, will be on the website. But thank you, Stewart. It was an excellent evening.
Thank you. And there is still a holder of the Pender chair, as you say, Sir Michael Pepper.
Yes, Michael Pepper, yes.
10th August 1942, so quite venerable now. He's a British physicist notable for his work in semiconductor nanostructures.
Yes.
So he and my daughter would probably have lots of things to talk about as well.
Right, yes.
But yeah, he's oh goodness, he worked at Plessey and GC Hurst Research Centre. Goodness me, I remember those places.
Yes. Yeah, we all do, Alan.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I went to Porthcurno many years ago, and there was nobody there who had any engineering knowledge. There was on display a bit of cable which was said to be the first transatlantic cable, but it was coax. And it was suggested to me that they'd invented coax by mistake. It seems unlikely somehow. Any comments?
Yeah, I ought to come back on that. I think you ought to come back again, and Stewart will confirm this, that no, we have the biggest collection of telegraph cables, including samples from the 1866 cables and earlier cables, and huge numbers of optical fibers. We have a huge fiber optic exhibition. It's I'm not quite sure when you came, but no, this is probably the most important collection of objects and documents on the history of communications. And Stewart will support me on that, I'm sure. And Bill Burns is aware of what is going on there as well. So yes, please come back and we will welcome you.
You're a good salesman.
I think we should clarify that coaxial cable wasn't a fortunate discovery. It was an engineering invention. And it was invented a long time before it could be built for submarine cables. But the first coaxial cables first started crossing the North Sea in 1947. And they really became effective once ICI had discovered polyethylene. Before that, the insulants were a big problem with keeping the attenuation down.
Yeah.
This is a 1947 cable, Stuart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, they're quite big.
This one is, it's about 2-inch diameter on the poly here.
Yeah. Bit bigger than the fiber optic cables of today.
And of course the armoring and everything else.
Yeah. When people talk about cable dimensions, it is the dimension of the dielectric or the insulation, if you like. That on top of that is the protection layers, but the design. So when we talk about a 17mm fiber optic cable, it is the diameter of the lightweight polyethylene in the middle of the cable, and they get bigger as they put more protection on the outside.
Yeah.
If I can share my screen for a second, I actually have a sample case made by Telcom for the 1870 Bona to Marseille cable.
Go on, Bill.
Hold on, I gotta minimize this.
While Bill's doing that, I can just briefly mention optical fibers. There's another Greenwich connection, of course, as I said in my presentation a couple of months ago. Sir Charles Cow, studied at what was Woolwich Poly, is now Greenwich University, and went on to work for Standard Telecommunication Labs in Harlow after working in Southeast London, where he invented optical fibers. So all this technology really comes out of Southeast London.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also at Greenwich, the first submarine repeated fiber optic cable was manufactured. The repeaters for it were manufactured. The cable was then made at Southampton, but which was STC's factory. But the first repeated fiber optic cable system was laid by STC in 1986. Wow. And the repeaters, power feed and terminal equipment were all made at Greenwich, as they are still today.
Yep, that is, as I said 2 months ago, that is the oldest telecoms factory in the world. That's still on the same site. I can't think of another one. Can you, Stuart? Can you?
No, it is. It's not obviously the size it was because they've lost all the riverfront, but it was first acquired by Glass Elliott in 1857, and it has been there ever since. Right. There is no telegraph cable manufacturing site or submarine cable system manufacturing site anywhere near as old as that. The next oldest one is Calais in France, and that is 1895, if I remember rightly, but I don't have that figure stuck in my brain.
I think we have some people from ASN on the call, so maybe somebody will let us know at some point. Bill, you're about to show us a picture of some coax cables.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with that. I have two screens here and I'm having trouble.
No, we can see the most Marseille to Bona cable.
Oh, can you see it?
We keep getting your Zoom dialog box in.
Yeah, all right, I'll just...
there we are.
Yeah, this is a Telcom sample case and with the 3 weights of armoring. And let me just go back here. That's close over the cables themselves. The copper conductor, of course, being the same in each case, only the weight of the armoring, the shore end and the intermediate and the deep sea cable. And
so to be clear, where you've got it near the shore, you put the really heavy protection on it because that's where the anchors and the fishing nets and all that sort of stuff get there. But for further out, you can have it much thinner. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that one. Now, how do I get rid of this?
if you remember from my presentation, he only built that system so he could get hold of his hands on the landline concession across France.
Of course, yeah.
And then because of establishment connections, it was given to somebody else who had influence in higher levels of British and French government. So we had to buy it off him. But he succeeded for 4 years, preventing him sell it to anybody else.
Just going back onto the Greenwich connection, I think the erbium doped fiber amplifiers were actually the first link was it was TAT 1213. Someone can correct me on that.
That's correct.
I'm
that's not quite true, actually. It was Rioja system, I think, was just before TAT 1213.
The one?
Yeah, it was.
Well, let's say the one.
That was the first transatlantic cable system to have fiber optic amplifiers.
And I think that I think that was an STC cable.
Yeah, it was correct.
It was, okay, yeah, I think so, because that did actually come up in Porthcurno, and it was it was a really milestone, that was, because that transformed cables. But I think that was originated from Greenwich, I think.
The erbium doped fiber amplifier was developed at Southampton University.
Yes,
and
it was.
A lot of the funding for that project came from SCC.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, yeah. So, and I'm pretty sure that many years ago, when I visited Greenwich, it's probably 20, 30 years ago, where they were, 20 years ago anyway, that is where they were testing out the EDFAs, and they had fantastic facilities there at the time. It was still, even though it had started in its early days, it was still a fantastic facility.
Mm. Can I ask a question? You mentioned earlier on, Stuart, Daniel Gooch, who of course was the chief engineer of the Great Western, working with Brunel. Let me be banal. Was he a rich geezer who'd made a lot of money from the GWR, who then invested it, or did he have a real contribution to make in telecoms?
Well, I think he was a very good engineer. He made money in the railways, and he was able to spend it, but he spent it in concert with Pender on a very clear plan. And if you look at the private letters and that sort of thing, they were working together. Quite a number of these projects were initially funded by Telcon so that they could lay them. And then once the project was established in the same way that today people will go out and look for investors in a system between points of presence, then once it got to the stage where there was sufficient investment, Pender would set up the operating companies and they would work together. And many times Telcon took part of their payment in shares in the operating company, because you couldn't get away with that today. And what Pender did was to remain a shareholder in Telcon throughout his life. And when he died, before he died, his son took over. That was James Pender, the son of his first wife. And when James Pender died, his grandson, John Pender's grandson, Henry Denison Pender, became the final director of Telcon. And he only retired when BICC and Telcon merged in the 1950s. So
wow,
the Penders had shareholdings in Telcon right the way up to the mid 1950s.
Wow.
But that's another story.
And the family's still around, I guess. The family's still around. Denison Pender Denison was Emma's surname, was it?
In 1890, I think, I can't prove this, but I think they were aware that she didn't have long to live. And John Denison Pender went to her and said, could I take your maiden name as a surname? And he wanted to do that for himself and his elder sister, Anne, who was mentally challenged. She was probably somewhere on the spectrum, and she never married. So in 1890, they got a royal warrant, and John was, because the Victorians tended to take the mother's maiden name as a middle name. So he was christened John Denizen Pender. Then when he took his mother's second name, his surname as a second surname, he became John Denizen Pender. And
right.
that is the family name.
Right, okay.
And I don't know if, we did invite Marianne along, but I don't know if this is on the call.
Another question. Do the contents of Enderby House archive still exist? If so, are they available to see, possibly at Porthcurno? Stuart and then Gareth, I think.
I think that's something for Neville to answer, because the STC archives, they're in boxes, what's left of them now. There was an awful lot of them, and some of them were, I believe, donated, but what's left is I'm not clear about. So
yeah, a lot of the Telcon records are at the Caird Library at the Maritime Museum. There's about 600 catalogue entries for Telcon at the Caird Library, which I've consulted. A lot of the manufacturing records, cable ship records, all from Telcon.
Yeah, we have got some records from Greenwich at Porthcurno. Not all of them have been catalogued even at the moment. Is that they were rescued actually from, I mean, to put it bluntly, they were rescued from a skip, which is a shame. But we have got some of the record from STC, but exactly, we have a list, but they're not properly catalogued. But I'm sure they will be in the future. And as we're working towards digitizing everything at the moment, then hopefully we'll be able to do that.
So Neville here, just to comment on what we have in Greenwich. We do have a number of ledgers. I think we have a number of original route maps, but I have to say I've been generally far too busy on day-to-day stuff to check out the archive, but it's possible next year I'll have a little bit more time to look at it. So maybe an update later next year will be possible.
Yeah, Alan Green would be a very good person to follow up on that. I'm sure many of you know Alan, but he was with STC, and he certainly has been keen to preserve the archives, whatever archives that he can. We have a small number of archives from STL, which date from the fibre optic days, but again, I wouldn't say they're hugely significant at the moment.
Neville, I think Julian is probably the person who knows most about the archive. And when I was working with Bobby on the ley lines, he helped a lot with some of the information that went into the information that helped her with choosing what the sculptures would look like. And I'm happy to come in and help him at any time if you want somebody who's local. I'm only 4 miles away, and go through that and help sort out what should be kept, what should be up for donation to Porthcurno or the IEC for that matter.
Okay, well, we can pencil that in for next year. Okay.
When we're all allowed to meet again. Yep, good. Okay, well, look, it's nearly 9 o'clock and we've been talking for an hour and a half. So I think it's probably time to say goodbye to everyone. And thank you to Stuart for a fascinating talk about Southeast London's history and the home of the first big international telecoms company, one of which I guess companies like Vodafone and others are still successors. In Vodafone's case, a direct successor, and BT's case, an indirect successor, I suppose. An amazing heritage, which we've almost entirely lost in Greenwich So sadly, as we have in so many other things in Greenwich's industrial history. But there we are.
That's absolutely true.
Thank you very much.
Just make the point that from 1870, the all the submarine cable manufacturing companies that existed were on the River Thames. When RS Newell closed down their North Birkenhead factory and came out of the industry, every submarine cable manufacturing company in the world was on the River Thames between Millwall and North Woolwich.
Yeah.
And are we going to advertise the January talk?
Yep. Mary, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Can you tell us about it, Mary? Can you tell us about it?
I thought you were going to. It's David Whittaker. I can't remember the date. I'm sorry. But he's talking about the 18th and 19th century chalk and gravel extraction in West Greenwich, basically Maidenstone Hill, and the various mines which are underneath that whole area.
Thank you, Mary. Mary is our co-chair, so thank you very much for organising the next talk in January. If you look at our website and our Facebook group, you'll find details. And we'll either meet face-to-face in Blackheath, in the old bakery behind Age Exchange, or I suspect we'll probably be virtual again, but let's see what happens over the next few weeks. I think it will
have to be virtual, Alan. We've actually cancelled the booking on the old bakehouse for that day.
Right, and I think we won't have our vaccinations by then. Joan and I probably won't until January, February, and therefore won't be immune until for another 4 weeks after that. So I guess it's another few months of virtual meetings. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Stewart, a fascinating presentation. We'll see you in January to learn about the next bit of Greenwich industrial history. And a final reminder that I have been recording this, despite the glitches in the internet. I have been recording this thanks to Zoom, so you'll be able to watch it on our YouTube channel by later in this week. So go to YouTube and search for Greenwich Industrial History, and you'll find Mary there talking about Greenwich Marsh to Greenwich Peninsula. You'll find me talking more about Greenwich and Woolwich as the birthplace of the global telecoms industry. And you'll find Stewart Ash talking about the Eastern Telegraph Company and its birth in this part of the world, and the first subsea cable to India. And those routes are still in operation to this day, and they're key to the subsea industry and the internet. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to close this all down now and say thank you, and thank you for an excellent presentation. Thanks for an excellent meeting. See you sometime in 2021, virtually or in the flesh. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Stuart.